Hello, welcome to Mrs. Q Live from Hanover Square, New York City. And I'll give us a few minutes for more people to join us. When you do join, please feel free to say hello in the chat so they know that you're here. I know we have a lot of regulars. It's nice to hear from you. And of course, from all of the new people, it's good to hear from you too. So just give this a couple of minutes for people to join in. And tonight we're going to be talking about Mr. Thomas Paine. And I hope you all know who Mr. Thomas Paine was. You might know a little bit about the beginning of his life and why he was important to our American history, but you might not know the later story about Mr. Thomas Paine. So tonight we're going to be talking all about the life of Thomas Paine. And I hope you enjoy it. Hope you've had a good week since I saw you last week and all getting ready for our Thanksgiving holiday next week. It is a very cold night here in Hanover Square, New York, and also where I am in northeastern Pennsylvania. It is quite cold as well. So I notice we don't have so many people joining us tonight. Usually we have a whole bunch of people waiting to come in who pop right in right away to join us here. So I'll just chat a little bit as we wait for more people to join us because I don't want anyone to miss the beginning of my talk about Thomas Paine. Oh, here we go. Now people are starting to join in. So welcome to Mrs. Q Live, History with Mrs. Q. I'm Mrs. Q, and tonight we're going to be talking about Thomas Paine. As I mentioned before, please give me a message in the chat. Here we go. Here comes some messages, and we have a whole bunch of regulars. Mr. Davis is here. My dog Rex. Hello, my dog Rex. Yes, everybody hit the like button and subscribe to my channel, and be sure to share it with people who you think are interested and having some fun learning about American history. Ms. Kane is here. Mr. Telek is here, who says he always learns something new on Thursdays and on Sundays too. Sundays is my Wilder show, isn't it? So Sundays is a little bit more extreme. When I do History with Mrs. Q here, I'm a little more moderated in my comments, but when I do my Sunday show, I'm a little bit more, shall we say, radical in my ideas. And my dog Rex says it's 77 degrees on his patio. Well, that is just lovely. I think it's about 30 degrees here in the hills of northeastern Pennsylvania. But if we were pretending, as we are, that it's Hanover Square, New York, I think it's about 40 degrees. In New York, it is winter. Miss Silver is here. Nice to see you too. Thank you. And Miss McCrae just visited the Thomas Paine Cottage Schoolhouse in New Rochelle over the weekend. Excellent. And I like to read the comments because we have people watching on YouTube and people watching on Facebook who can't see each other's comments. So I like to read them so everyone can hear what everybody else is commenting on and saying. So tonight we are going to be talking about the great Thomas Paine. And here he is. And let me just get my backgrounds prepared here so I don't have to take too long to switch between them. And here is Mr. Thomas Paine in a portrait of him. And we all, I hope, still learn about Thomas Paine in American history class, although I don't know if we learned the whole story. At least I know I didn't learn the whole story until I became a Revolutionary War historian. So tonight I'll be telling you the story of Mr. Thomas Paine from the point of view of Mrs. Q. If you don't know already, I am a merchant in Revolutionary War, New York City. The year tonight is 1793. So we are well out of the American Revolution and into the administration of President George Washington and Vice President John Adams. The capital city is Philadelphia, and I am joining you from New York. And we're going to take a look back on Thomas Paine's contribution to the Revolutionary War, or the war with England. And then we're going to talk a little bit about where Thomas Paine is in 1793. And you might be surprised to hear that part. So Thomas Paine, I think probably many of you know, wrote a very popular pamphlet in 1776 called Common Sense. And I have a picture of an original copy of Common Sense here for you to see. And there's Common Sense. If you've never seen any of these pamphlets, they're really interesting to see. They can be very difficult to read because of the typeset, which you in your time are not that familiar with. And the paper is very thick, and they're very interesting if you ever get to see an original one. But all of these that I'm going to talk about tonight are available in your time in what you call PDF format if you'd like to download any of them and read them for yourself. So Thomas Paine came to America in 1774, and he was already 37 years old at that time. He was born in England. And he went through a number of different professions before he arrived in America. One of them, which I thought was quite interesting, is that his father was a master staymaker, which is the underwear we all wear in the 18th century, right, ladies, that we lace up the front or the back that gives us that nice, beautiful figure for our gowns and our jackets and clothing. His father was a master staymaker, and among other things, Mr. Paine worked as a staymaster as well. He also worked as a teacher, and he was very influenced in England by a group of radical Republicans. And I don't mean Republicans like your political party, but I mean Republicans as people who advocated for Republican form of government. And in 1774, he met Benjamin Franklin, who was, you might remember, the Pennsylvania colonial agent to the Parliament. They met there and had some discussions, and Mr. Franklin invited Mr. Paine to move to Philadelphia, which he did. When he got to Philadelphia, he began working on a brand new magazine that was called the Pennsylvania Magazine. Pennsylvania Magazine was founded by a printer named Robert Aiken. It started in 1775, and the idea he had for his magazine was that it would be a magazine purely about America by American writers. In 1775, many of the publications still were heavily carrying articles about England and Europe. And Mr. Aiken decided that it was time America, who he felt now was ready to be a mature country on its own, should have its own magazine. And he hired Mr. Paine to be the editor of this magazine, when they wrote about all sorts of different issues in the magazine. Oh, Mr. and Mrs. Hamlin are here, otherwise known as, oh my God, I'm an old rebel now. Thank you so much for joining me to talk about Thomas Paine tonight. And I'm just going to move my notes over here a little bit because there's so much to talk about Mr. Paine. I might forget a few little things. So the Pennsylvania Magazine, a purely American magazine edited by Mr. Thomas Paine, and it became very quickly very famous magazine, highest circulation in America. And in the first issue, Mr. Paine wrote, "Every heart and hand seemed to be engaged in the interesting struggle for American liberty." And he said the magazine should be a nursery of genius for a nation that had now outgrown the state of infancy. And that might sound familiar to you if you have read Common Sense, because one of his theories in Common Sense is that the American colonies were no longer an infant and no longer had to be fed and nurtured and cared for by its parent, but was ready to go off now and live its independent life. So if that sounds familiar, well, this is just about, a year before Common Sense would be published, that he's putting forth these ideas that America has outgrown our infancy and it's time for us to move on. So in 1776, he does publish Common Sense, which you see here. Common Sense came out in February, and it was immediately a massively popular bestseller, because what Mr. Paine did that many others were not able to do was to take the ideas surrounding separation from England and why we should do that, and to write them in a way that the regular people of America could understand, the common sense people of America. Let's see. Oh, John the Beagle Dad just joined us. Hello. What do I think of the George Washington movie coming out? John the Beagle Dad, I don't want to say much about it, but I think that a very good friend of mine is in that movie. There are a few Washington movies coming out, and I'm not sure if that's the one he's in, but I think a very good friend of mine is in that or the other Washington movie that's coming out. So on Common Sense, for the common sense people of America. And he starts out talking about, in very clear terms, what the role of government is or ought to be. Now, the very educated men throughout America who had been to college and had understood history and different types of governments and philosophies and were being influenced by the Enlightenment, as it's called, all knew these things and had been writing about them as well, but they had been writing about them to each other and not writing for the regular people of America. So Mr. Paine, who himself was, or I should say is, an unparalleled genius, a brilliant mind, and an incredible speaker and communicator, was able to take these very difficult concepts and put them into terms that regular Americans could now understand. And one of those terms was government. What is government for? And Mr. Paine says that government is always bad. It's always evil and it's always bad, but it is in some form necessary. So he said, what we want to do is find a government that delivers the most back to the people for the least cost. And he means not only financial cost as in taxes, but in surrendering of one's rights. So he says the government's primary job is to protect the people and guarantee their natural rights without intruding too much in their life and without taking too much income from them. He says that is the balance that we are supposed to strike. The government always needs to act in the interest of those people. And when it doesn't, it becomes illegitimate and needs to be replaced and ought to be replaced. The next thing he does is he goes on to say that in America, we are now living in a situation where we are paying for our government, but it's chaos and anarchy. So he says, if you are paying for a government, but your life is as bad as or worse than if you didn't have one, why, you're twice as abused, aren't you? Because the government is abusing you by first not protecting you, and secondly, taking away your rights by making you live in a state of chaos and anarchy, which takes away your freedom, and you're paying for it. So he says all of these things are wrong. They're bad. They're evil. And they're against nature. They're against God's plan for mankind. The next thing he does is he analyzes the British government and shows that it is an unnatural state of governance. John the Beagle Dead, we are only on the year 1776. We are going to talk about France, where Mr. Paine is this year, as we are in the year 1793. And we are going to talk about Mr. Paine being currently in France and what's happening with him. So we'll get there, but I'm very impressed that you knew that he did wind up in France in some trouble. So we are going to talk about that. So the next thing he says is the British government is unnatural. It is a hereditary government, and heredity denies future generations the right of self-governance, right? So he says, first of all, we have this monarch. He says the monarch, his job is to make decisions for the subjects of Britain, but he doesn't know anything. He lives a completely secluded life, and he knows the least about life than anyone in the British Empire. And therefore, he's the least qualified to make a decision concerning anything. So he says that in itself is ridiculous. And then he talks about the symbol of the crown, the lion. And he says, if God meant us to have kings, why does he send us asses as lions? You see, so he's talking about the ridiculousness of a monarch. So the monarch role is ridiculous. He says, then we have the House of Lords, which is another hereditary body, which means they don't act in the interest of the people either. Their seats are guaranteed and they're inherited. Therefore, they don't care about the people. Oh, Mr. Robbins has joined us. Hello, Mr. Robbins. So he says the monarch doesn't care about the people and actually doesn't know any people. The lords, well, they don't care about the people because their seats are guaranteed for generations, for life. He says, so then they tell us we have the Commons, the House of Commons, to represent the regular people and provide some sort of check and balance on the other two powers who are interested only in themselves. But he says we see that in itself is also a farce, and that the corporations and the wealthy pay for the political campaigns of the men who run to sit in the Commons. So their interest is in their donors. And in addition, their interest is in favoring the king so that the king can grant them favors as well. He says, so this whole idea that the monarch of England is not powerful and the Lords are not powerful because of this House of Commons. He says the whole thing is a farce. And that isn't the way it works at all. And for 1776 to be saying this is so radical and so shocking that people just couldn't stop reading this pamphlet. It went through step by step by step, explaining these concepts to the regular people of America. Regular people. And everyone started talking about it. Everywhere you went, someone was talking about the ideas and common sense. He goes through and he talks about that, and he talks about a number of other things, some economic things, our relationship to England, our founding, what our rights are. But the important thing he says in closing in Common Sense is he says that we have an opportunity here to do something that's never been done before, something so fantastic and such an amazing opportunity that we should take it now. He says that we should all in America put aside all of our differences, put together where we came from, our different religions, our different economic status, what we do for a living, all of the different ways that we have been divided these years by agents of the crown. We should put all of this aside. He said, let's even forget the name Whig and Tory. Let's even forget the politics of the time and come together to do this incredible thing, this one opportunity we have to separate from England and create our own country with our own government that we elect from among ourselves. He says, and then if we choose to go back to arguing and bickering about these things, at least it is our own country and our own government about which we'll be doing it. And he goes on to talk about how in doing so, we will now also be free of England's enemies. Spain will no longer be a rival to us, neither will France, or any of England's traditional enemies will no longer be ours. And that we can stake out on this continent, make alliances, and be something newer and greater than Great Britain itself. So you can see what an incredible pamphlet this was. Now, this pamphlet brought everyone together in 1776, something I would like to note that no one else was able to do. None of the other revolutionaries of that time were able to create a cohesive unit of Americans willing now to stand against England. And let's look at what time this was published, February of 1776. The war with England had already been going on nearly a year. Since April of the year before, we had been at war with England. You remember Lexington and Concord. Yet even after nearly 1 year of war, Americans were not united. So the war didn't unite Americans. The commander, General Washington, didn't unite Americans. And none of the so-called revolutionaries in the Continental Congress, Mr. Adams, Mr. Jay, or any of the others, were able to unite Americans. None of the radicals writing in New York, Mr. Hamilton and others, none of them united Americans. But Mr. Paine did. Mr. Paine united Americans behind the cause of separating from England and convinced them that England had already invaded us, that they had already started a war, that we were already, at the time of this publication, at war if we were recognizing it or not, and that we must fight. He said, if we don't fight, what will we have? An occupied country. Everything will be taken away from us. And he goes on later in the next piece, we're going to talk about the crisis, to say that if we were not to fight, that we would have a whole generation of children fathered by Englishmen and Hessian soldiers whose lineage we would never even know. If you know what I'm hinting at there would happen to the ladies. So this is common sense. People rally, the men come together and form militias, or they enlist in continental regiments, and the war continues through 1776. Now, you might know that by the end of 1776, the Americans, we had lost very, very badly. We have lost virtually everything key in New York, right? We had lost Staten Island, Long Island, as it's called, or at least the part of Long Island near Manhattan, what would be known in your time as Brooklyn and Queens. Manhattan was lost, Upper Manhattan and the Bronx were lost, and as were the East River, the Long Island Sound, and most of the Hudson River. The only reason the entire Hudson River was not lost was in September of 1776. Um, Mr. Benedict Arnold made a courageous stand against the British Navy in Lake Champlain, preventing them from moving entirely down the Hudson River and taking Lake Champlain, Lake George, and the entire Hudson that winter, and giving the Americans time to regroup and retake possession of the lower Hudson River. So it's really Colonel Benedict Arnold in 1776 who saves at least part of Britain's access to New York, or the key part of New York, Manhattan, and the harbor. Well, by the end of 1776, Manhattan Island was the now command center of the British military, and it stayed there for the next 7 years. John the Beagle Dad says, yes, Arnold constructed a navy. It's called the Battle of Valcour Island. My 21st century self has a video here on YouTube all about the Battle of Valcour Island. You could check it out, where I talk about the incredible feat achieved by Benedict Arnold at Valcour Island in Lake Champlain. So you can check out my future self talking about that. So it's the end of 1776, and as you may know, on the last day of the year, the enlistments expired. And many of the men were just at the end of their ability to go on at the end of the year. It was winter, and may I remind you that 1776 was also during a mini ice age. We were coming out of a mini ice age, and the winters were extraordinarily cold and bitter. The men had lost every major battle. It was cold, it was winter, they were sick, they did not have supplies, they did not have food, and most of them were just waiting until midnight on December 31st to go home. And General Washington needed someone to rally these men to continue fighting, and he turned to Mr. Paine, because Mr. Paine had written another pamphlet, and let's find it here. Here it is. And that pamphlet is The American Crisis, #1. Who do we have here? We have Mr. Facemeyer is watching on Facebook from Manassas, and Miss Marzoff, hello from Tucson. Hello. Oh, it's so great to see you. Thank you for watching. So his next big achievement will be The American Crisis, #1 by the author of Common Sense. And this is part of a series. I think there are maybe 6 or 7. I don't remember. There could be more. But this comes out in December of 1776. And this is the one you probably know. These are the times that try men's souls. The sunshine soldier and summer patriot in times like this will shrink from duty. But he says, but the men who stand and continue fighting will be remembered for all times, for all men and women, for what they have done. So in other words, the guys who are just like weekend soldiers here, summer soldiers and sunshine patriots, right? They're only soldiers in the summer and they're only patriots when it's easy, are all going to shrink from duty at times like this. But the men who persevere, the ones who go on, will be known for generations for their bravery. So a wonderful opening here. He also says, what we achieve too lightly, we value too little. He says, so what's good to know is that the greater the struggle against tyranny, the greater the joy and the triumph. So he's saying, of course, it's going to be hard, but the harder the fight, the greater the victory. And we must keep that in mind. If it's too easy, it's not as valuable. So we have to fight for this thing, this goal at the end, because that achievement will be historic. Let's see, we have some comments. John the Beagle Dad says, The American Crisis, Mr. Paine simplified the situation so that everyone can understand and comprehend what was at stake. Exactly. LB Girl 1988 is here. Thank you for joining us. He does, and he goes through in The Crisis and talks about the previous year and all of the difficulties of the previous year, everything they have struggled through, right, to get to where they are now. And he talks about, yes, we lost it, New York. Yes, the army was too slow in coming together. And probably, excuse me. We were too slow in forming an army and probably should have a year earlier, but all of this is behind us. We can bicker and argue over all of these things, all of the bad decisions and all the things that have gone wrong, but it's behind us and we must move forward. And then he goes on and he gives an incredible view of Tories, right? So Tories are loyalists and Whigs are the patriots. And he just talks about how horrible Tories are, that Tories are addicted to weakness because they love being taken care of by the government. And they'll do anything to continue being taken care of by England. He says, which at the same time enslaves them. He says, so your dependence on the government enslaves you to that government. And he said, and that's what a Tory is. He says, I would rather fight with 100 Whigs than 1,000 Tories, because the Whigs have spirit in their heart and they have a goal they're fighting for. And he talks about a Tory that he saw at Amboy, New Jersey, who was standing there with his little girl. And he said, that he heard the gentleman say, well, let's get this over with, it, whatever I need to do so that we can have peace in my time. And he says, this is a disgrace that a father would say, let us have peace in my time. He says, a true father says, let us have trouble in my time so my child may have peace in her time. So some wonderful things in here, wonderful and inspiring. John the Beagle Dad says he knows quite a few Tories. I hear you have quite a few Tories in your time. I hear you do. People who love being dependent on the government. After all of this, that's why I do this every Thursday, to remind you about all of this. So Paine says those who support England do so because they want to be taken care of by England. He's, defended from England's enemies, all these different things. He says, but those enemies won't be our enemies if we're not with England anymore. And we can take care of ourselves. And again, in here, he puts forth that idea that we are no longer in infancy. We are now adults and no longer need to be fed milk, but can chew meat. So he talks about that in here. And this, of course, inspires all of the soldiers to rally and engage in Washington's plan for the crossing of the Delaware River on Christmas Day and the successful taking of the Hessian encampment at Trenton. And then after that, they continue to stay on and fight at Trenton again and Princeton in January, Battle of Princeton in January. So here we have Thomas Paine to the rescue yet again, and he will continue to write these throughout the Revolutionary War. My dog Rex says the Indian tribes were also chaotic in those times. Yes, that's something maybe we'll speak about one night, is that, the Iroquois Confederacy, which had existed for a very long time, fell apart during the Revolutionary War. The Iroquois Confederacy, which was founded to keep the various tribes who were members from fighting with each other, from ever going to war again against each other, broke them up, and they did go to war again against each other. So very sad for them. The Iroquois story of the American Revolution is a great and fascinating, tragic story all its own, which maybe we'll talk about one night. Fort Ticonderoga is celebrating the 250th anniversary of the military this year. Oh, I hear that, I think it's the first or second weekend in December, that the gentlemen at Ticonderoga are going to reenact General Henry Knox and his men removing the cannon in the winter of 1775 to bring them to Boston for the spring of 1776. And if you in the future can go to see this, this is one of the most stunning feats of the American Revolutionary War, when General Knox and his men place cannon on carts and sleds and anything they can find, use oxen, horse, and manpower, and they take those cannon from Ticonderoga through the Berkshire Mountains and get them by spring to reinforce General Washington in Boston. It is one of the most inspiring stories of the American spirit of the Revolutionary War. So if any of you are in the Northeast or you want to travel, you can look at Fort Ticonderoga's website. I don't recall if it's the weekend of the 5th or the weekend of the 12th that they are doing it. So if you can get there, that is one of the most incredible occasions to celebrate. So just off track a little bit. And those cannon ended up on the Constitution. So incredible feat of those men in the winter, in the New England winter at the end of an ice age. So remember that part too. So during the Revolutionary War, Mr. Paine works with the Congress to help secure financing from France. He goes to France where he already knows Benjamin Franklin. He knows a couple of people there. And he, along with Lieutenant Colonel John Lawrence, obtain an incredible financing package for the American Congress. Just incredible support from France he comes back with. Now, during this time, he gets involved in a little bit of a conflict with a gentleman in the Congress named Silas Deane, who Mr. Paine suggests is corrupt. And I won't go into the whole Silas Deane affair. You can find it and read about it. And Silas Deane was protected by another very powerful person in the Congress who was not elected, but he was there, Mr. Robert Morris, a financier. And Thomas Paine suffered great indignities and insults for suggesting that Silas Deane was crooked, was corrupt. He was even condemned as being a traitor for attacking a great patriot. And then later, the whole corruption of Mr. Deane came out, and they apologized to Mr. Paine for what they'd done to him. A little too late, but he did get his apology once everybody realized that Mr. Deane was indeed engaging in corruption. Now, if you look through common sense, and you look at the Declaration of Independence, you might see some very similar phrasing there, right? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That when any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and institute new governments. Who does that sound like? Well, it sounds like Mr. Paine, because it is believed that most of that section of the Declaration of Independence was either written by Thomas Paine or a draft was written and submitted to Mr. Jefferson and included in the final Declaration of Independence. So here we see Thomas Paine's contribution again. And we just want to move on to the next background here. So the next thing we're going to talk about, Thomas Paine, is something he writes called The Rights of Man. Now, a whole sequence of events happens, and you know, something broke out called the French Revolution, right? And at this time, Thomas Paine had gone to England, where he was watching what was happening in the French Revolution. And a gentleman in the British Parliament named Edmund Burke, a fine gentleman, Mr. Burke, got up and gave a long speech and wrote a pamphlet about the dangers of the French Revolution. And you could expect that England would be thinking that, because they had just lost their American colonies through revolution, and now right on the other side of them is the French Revolution, and their fear that a successful French Revolution would lead to the overthrow of the monarchy and aristocracy in England as well. So you could see that that would be Mr. Burke's interest, would be in refuting all of the philosophy of the French Revolution to the people of England, to make sure those ideas don't catch on in England. Well, Mr. Paine writes something called The Rights of Man, answer to Mr. Burr's attack on the French Revolution. And he can't get anyone to publish it. So he leaves it in the hands of a number of radicals in England, one of them being the great poet and artist, William Blake, another one being Mary Shelley's father, William Godwin. And while he was in France, this was published in England, finally published. And you can guess the Parliament was not happy about this being published, were they? Rights of Man was published. Let me see what year. I have my notes here. Where are we? Rights of Man. Give me a moment. I think it's about 1791, I want to say. The Rights of Man. I'm sorry about this. I'm mixing up my Rights of Man. Yes, 1791, and sold about 1 million copies. So it's very well received in England by lots of people. The aristocracy is very worried about, right? Protestant dissenters, Democrats, craftsmen, factory hands, the industrial part of northern England, where there are lots of people who are working and building up some new type of middle class. This is all very popular for them, right? And Paine says, when a government doesn't safeguard the natural rights of the people, popular revolution is permissible. Now, isn't that what he said in Common Sense? Isn't that what he says in the beginning of the Declaration of Independence? Or if Mr. Jefferson wrote what Mr. Jefferson says. And so these are the same principles upon which our own revolution was founded. When a government doesn't safeguard the natural rights of the people, popular revolution is permissible. And so he defends the French Revolution on this foundation. Now, he says some other things that sound very familiar to our own Declaration of Independence. He says, rights are not given by a government, but occur naturally. It's a perversion of terms to say that a charter, a document, gives rights. A document only operates by a contrary effect, that of taking rights away. Rights are inherent in all the inhabitants. But charters, by annulling those rights in the majority, leave the right by exclusion in the hands of the few. They consequently are instruments of injustice. So he's saying all these documents, all they do is restrict rights to the few who have the ability to bestow them on everyone, but they're natural rights. And he says the fact, therefore, must be that the individuals themselves, each in his own personal and sovereign right, entered into a contract with each other to produce a government, right? Which is what he says has to happen in the Declaration of Independence. And this is the only mode in which governments have a right to arise, and the only principle on which they have to exist, right from our Declaration of Independence. Well, of course, they are not happy about this. Government's sole purpose is safeguarding the individual and her inherent inalienable rights. Each societal institution that does not benefit the nation is illegitimate. And I believe this is true for all time. So I'm going to read it to you again. Government's sole purpose is safeguarding the individual and her inherent inalienable rights. Each societal institution that does not benefit the nation, the people, is illegitimate. So as you can guess, this got him into big trouble in England. He was in France. They tried him in England in absentia, convicted him of seditious libel against the crown, and sentenced him to death, which of course they couldn't carry out because he was in France. When Paine heard about the conviction, he said, if to expose the fraud and imposition of monarchy, to promote universal peace, civilization, and commerce, and to break the chains of political superstition and raise degraded man to his proper rank, if these things be libelous, let the name of libeler be engraved on my tomb. Is that not a patriot? Is that not our own American Revolution that we're hearing right here? So someone explained to me why in this year, 1793, with our own government now established in Philadelphia, a government run by the very men who benefited from the works of Thomas Paine, who would not be in government today, nor would we have had maybe a successful revolution without his work. Why those very men in Philadelphia allow Mr. Paine to sit rotting in a French prison with our ambassador, Mr. Gouverneur Morris of my state, New York, as ambassador to France, denying Mr. Paine's American citizenship, claiming that Mr. Paine is an English citizen, and therefore the French can keep him in prison. Tell me how that comes about. Tell me how it comes about that the government of Mr. Washington and Mr. Hamilton and Mr. Adams, men who themselves benefited from the writing and philosophy and brilliant mind of Thomas Paine, now here in America say those very things that Thomas Paine wrote are indeed seditious. Seditious to England and to America. And why do they favor England over America, when England over France, when France helped us to defeat England? Why do these gentlemen now defend England and leave Mr. Paine in jail? They leave Mr. Paine in jail because Mr. Paine has very eloquently pointed out that their new constitution is simply a replica of what we fought against in England, and that perhaps these gentlemen all along had it in their mind to establish a government similar to England in order to empower themselves, and never intended to hand power over to the regular people of England. Remember last week we laughed at Publius, and we talked about how the 27 gentlemen who talked about the 3 squeamish ladies who no longer wanted to read Publius were making fun of Federalists, and said that Federalists thought that the common people were just orangutans and fools and idiots. And why would we give them any role in the government that meant anything? And they said the House of Representatives means nothing because it can always be overruled by the Senate and the president, which of course will come out of the aristocratic classes as they grow in America. Well, Thomas Paine said these same things. And for saying it, for criticizing them, he sits today in a prison in France awaiting his death. So I'd like all of you to consider that. Consider those ideas, which may be different from what you learned in school. Because of course I'm here on Thursday nights to get you to think about things a little differently. And maybe you'll think about it a little differently and you might reject that point of view, and that's all right, as long as you consider it seriously. Why would those gentlemen declare Thomas Paine's words now to be seditious and to leave him to await death in a French prison? Now I'll skip ahead into the future and tell you that Thomas Paine will get out of prison. He will narrowly escape being executed. He'll get out of prison when Mr. Jefferson takes office. And Mr. Jefferson, when Mr. Jefferson takes office, or maybe Mr. Adams takes office? Mr. Adams takes office. And James Monroe, who now will be ambassador to France, goes to France and claims Thomas Paine as an American and has him released from jail. Now, why Thomas Paine is in jail is because he gets himself in the middle of the French Revolution, allied with one faction, helping them write their constitution. And then when that faction fell out of power, the other faction, of course, wanting to take full power, threw him in prison. So that's how he wound up in prison. And so that is the story of Mr. Thomas Paine, who gave us our revolution and then was shunned by the very government that revolution resulted in for pointing out the flaws in that government. Something to think about, right? So I hope you all enjoyed that. Hope you all enjoyed that very much. And please, like my Mrs. Q videos and share them with people. Subscribe to my channel. Also, I'd like to invite you to join my Patreon community. I am Mrs. Q History on Patreon. I do have a free membership, and there you can see all the links to all of my videos, my radio programs, and any social media that I issue or any of my thoughts. And then I do have some paid levels of subscription where you can get all kinds of special things, documents and analysis and things. So please come over to Patreon and check out my American History community. And this Sunday, I will be on republicbroadcastingnetwork.org at 9 p.m. Not sure what I'll be talking about. I did talk about Mr. Paine last Sunday in much more detail than tonight. So tonight is kind of Thomas Paine light. But I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope you got a little bit of a different look at the men involved in the American Revolution and what their intentions might have been. Because, of course, isn't it ridiculous to think that all men entered the American Revolution with the same intentions? Of course they didn't. Of course they didn't. But the importance is who triumphed at the end. Oh, Mr. Whitener was here tonight and says that's terrific. Thank you, Mr. Whitener. I hear you're something in the future called a thought criminal. I think I might be a thought criminal in my time as well. I think I might be in both of my times be considered a thought criminal. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me. It's always a pleasure, and I hope you all have a great week. Miss Silver says, many thanks for a very interesting subject, a little surprising, I might say. I'm just going to conclude here and say that much of what we have in our history textbooks and popular history books are unfortunately not the truth of what happened. And sometimes on my Sunday show, I do talk about that. And I talk about how I also understand the need for a founding mythology. But it is important to understand the difference between the founding mythology and the reality of what really happened. There's nothing wrong with looking back at the good and the bad. It doesn't make America any less great. And it doesn't mean I love America any less, because, I do all of this work out of my own love for America. Mr. Whitener says he thinks I may be a thought criminal. I think I may be too. Ms. Wetzel says, thank you for such an informative night. As I said, it's always my pleasure to have you join me here. I hope you all have a wonderful night, a lovely weekend, and maybe some of you will join me Sunday night on republicbroadcasting.org, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you all very much, and I'll see you next week.